Alright guys, how's it going? As I said I would be doing, the last week of my vacation, I played World of Warcraft Classic every day. I've got 3 entire days on my rogue. Bit of a grind it has to be said, and only level 34, with level 60 being maximum during Classic. To be fair, I haven't really been super focused on leveling her, but what a beauty she is, I'm sure you'll all agree. It's a new week though, and that means a new video. Having had a look around, there's been plenty of news and awful scandals involving AMD since my break, so that'll be the topic for this one, starting with everyone's favourite failure of a CPU architecture. I am of course referring to Bulldozer. Intel had launched the first hyper-threading CPU back in 2002 with the Pentium 4s, but they then dropped hyper-threading from the initial batch of Core CPUs, like the Core 2 Duos and Core 2 Quads, only to have it return in 2008 with the Nehalem Core i7 line. AMD had no such simultaneous multi-threading technology in any of their Athlons, their Phenom or their Phenom 2s, and it was clear that whenever hyperthreading was utilised effectively, Intel had a very clear lead during this generation. Later on, AMD would release the 6-core Thuban line of processors, which were based on the Phenom 2s. They just had 6 cores instead of 4. And in multi-threaded benchmarks, that was faster at least than the lower-end i7-920 and 860, but it still lagged quite far behind Intel's flagships, especially the i7-980X, which was rather beastly with its 6 cores and 12 threads. Bulldozer was expected to remedy this technology gap, but rather than implement simultaneous multi-threading, SMT, AMD decided rather to use something else, cluster-based multi-threading, or CMT. Essentially, CMD came down to each Bulldozer CPU being split into modules. One of these each is a module. So an 8-core CPU would have 4 modules, and each module had some shared resources. Quite a lot of shared resources, it has to be said, especially at the front end. But each of these 8-core chips did have 8 individual integer cores, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. However, we can clearly see that the floating point unit in each module is shared. So really we were talking only 4 floating point units and only 4 sets of shared L2 per CPU. Worse than this though was the CMT module penalty, which meant a drop-off in performance depending on which of and how many of these cores were being utilised at the same time. And a lot of that came down to this sharing. We've all heard about Zen's Windows scheduling issues. Bulldozer was even worse, and in fact, in some cases, we saw the same 8-core chips were actually performing much better when 2 of the modules were turned off manually. Same chip, half of it disabled, higher performance, so long as the application was limited to 4 cores, of course. But worse than all of this was simply the CPU just wasn't very good, especially at floating point, as you might have imagined. The 8-core Bulldozer FX8150 languished behind the 4-core 8-thread 2600K in Cinebench 11.5, which is a floating point load. That's around about 15% behind the Intel CPU. However, in heavily threaded integer loads like the X264HD benchmark here, it was just about on par. It wasn't long before people started questioning whether or not Bulldozer truly was an 8-core chip, or was it really just a quad-core with some kind of fancy hyper-threading, and the arguments lasted for years on forums. And then finally, in 2015, AMD were sued in San Jose's district court, accused of false advertising, fraud, negligent misrepresentation, and unjust enrichment. Now, as far as I'm aware, there is no actual legal definition of a microprocessor core. They're all different for a start, and in the pre-Pentium days, the floating point unit was completely separate, so a core would have been a single integer core. So by the classical definition of a core, AMD were justified in calling it an 8-core CPU, because it did have 8 integer cores. And as the lawsuit was announced over at the Register's conclusion, we see that such a ruling will be avoided if AMD proves that its 8-core Bulldozer processors do not drop to 4-core performance in multi-threaded FPU benchmark tests. And while it didn't quite drop to that level of performance, we did see that there was a drop-off in performance between heavy integer and heavy floating point loads. In the end up, last week, AMD settled for $12.1 million, with users qualifying for the compensation estimated to receive in the region of $35. Those being qualified meaning Californian residents who bought select 8-core CPUs, and also people who bought directly from AMD's website. AMD are saying this: AMD is pleased to have reached a settlement of this lawsuit. While we believe that allegations are without merit, we also believe that eliminating the distraction and settling this litigation is in our best interest. Now, I followed this at a distance for a while, and I honestly thought it was a complete waste of time. But obviously, when there's money to be had, nothing is a waste of time, especially to lawyers. Regarding the payout, $12.1 million is not a whole lot, and most of it probably won't even be claimed, with the Register reckoning that if 1 in 5 people did claim, which is a number that seems extremely high to me, then they would receive only $35 each. What I found most interesting about that number is that NVIDIA GTX 970 owners only got $30, even with NVIDIA clearly setting out to deceive them from the very start. It seems likely to me that the only real winners are the lawyers, with AMD's lawyers not exactly covering themselves in glory. But if nothing else, at least this whole episode must have been a lesson learned for AMD's marketing, right? Right? The Ryzen 3000 series launched in July to pretty much universal acclaim, based on its huge performance and performance per watt uplift over both AMD's previous generation Zen and Intel's current generation, with Intel only just holding a very small gaming lead with the 9900K. But as with every other AMD launch, it fell somewhat short of being perfect, with the worst offence by far the inability of most CPUs being able to reach their advertised boost clock. Or if they could, they were capable of holding it for only a very short time, counted in milliseconds. And no matter where I read, it was the same. The chips were just not hitting their advertised boost clocks. Der Bauer in particular had a real go at AMD for what essentially came down to false marketing. In particular, calling out this part of AMD's Ryzen 3000 Precision Boost Overdrive video.
What if you could plug in up to 200 megahertz of extra boost, and suddenly that's 4.75 gigahertz.
Robert Hallock of AMD appeared to claim 4.75 gigahertz for a chip with 4.55 gigahertz on the box was a likely result due to Ryzen 3000 Precision Boost Overdrive. Of course, nothing of this sort happened, and in fact, what we saw in the box was not even reached in the vast majority of cases. At this time, the AMD fanboys started giving Der Bauer and anybody else who dared to claim this was false marketing a hard time, while justifying it away as only being 25 MHz less than advertised, so it doesn't really matter. And of course, this simply led to further updates by Der Bauer on the topic, because that's the way it works out. And finally last week, he released this video discussing the results of his Ryzen 3000 survey findings. Findings which left very few impressed by AMD. Out of 2,726 valid submissions to his survey, just about half of the 3600 owners reported their chips reaching the advertised boost of 4.2 GHz. Only 9.4% of 3600X buyers reported their chip reaching the 4.4 GHz advertised boost clock. 14.7% of 3700X buyers reported reaching their advertised boost of 4.4 GHz. And 26.7% of 3800X users reported that their advertised 4.5 GHz boost was being reached. Worst of all though was the 12-core 3900X, with only 5.6% of respondents reaching the advertised 4.6 GHz on the box. Now, to be clear here, these are results from a range of people who have varying configurations, coolers, etc. So these results should not be treated as gospel. However, It's more than obvious that there is an issue here, and many Ryzen 3000 CPUs are simply not hitting the advertised clocks. In fact, back in July I said on the Discord that this is likely just a BIOS thing, and it will be fixed eventually. And later on, various sources discovered that some chips were actually getting slightly higher than advertised boost speeds, depending on the motherboard, and there were ranges of almost 200 MHz on the top clock speed being noticed even between X570 motherboards. So my theory appeared to hold at least some water. A couple of weeks before that even, over at the OCN forum, The Stilt here and Shamino, who had been working with ASUS before the launch, they both reported similar kind of information, with the Stilt going into these details. As we can see in his table, most of the Ryzen 3000 SKUs had higher boost tables than we currently see in most cases, the 3800X in particular being 4550 MHz, which is what we just saw with Gigabyte's X570 Aorus Extreme. And then we also see the 3900X with a 4650 MHz boost clock. But we know that at launch, very few chips even reached 4600. The Stilt also says that later lowering of limits appeared to be related to temperature. And this one from Shamino later on in the same forum, AMD were being too aggressive with the boost previously. The current boost behaviour is more in line with their confidence in long-term reliability, and I have not heard of any changes to this stance, though I have heard of a more customizable version in the future. So with all this, it's not exactly difficult to put a likely story together here. It's possible, even plausible, that a late change to the plan on binning meant that they were forced to backtrack on their intended claims, just a little bit too late. This is AMD we're talking about here. We know they've done similar things in the past, though generally it's been their GPU division. You remember the Hawaii reference cooler disaster, the Polaris PCI disaster, and most recently the thing with the RX 690 becoming the 5700 XT pretty late in the game. These late money-saving decisions can and almost always do have unintended and unwanted consequences. The alternative is that AMD just flat out lied in their marketing, isn't it? And we know they're not that stupid, right? Der Bauer's video, of course, caused a lot of discussion, so it was no huge surprise when he reported that AMD had released a statement soon after his video launched. Let me just read it out. AMD statement on boost clocks. AMD is pleased with the strong momentum of 3rd gen AMD Ryzen processors in the PC enthusiast and gaming communities. We closely monitor community feedback on our products and understand that some 3rd gen AMD Ryzen users are reporting boost clock speeds below the expected processor boost frequency. While processor boost frequency is dependent on many variables, including workload, system design, and cooling solution, we have closely reviewed the feedback from our customers and have identified an issue in our firmware that reduces boost frequency in some situations. We are in the process of preparing a BIOS update for our motherboard partners that addresses that issue and includes additional boost performance optimizations. We will provide an update on September the 10th to the community regarding the availability of the BIOS. So, make of that what you will. The author of the Ryzen DRAM calculator, Lusmus about this. I have no idea how to pronounce this guy's name. Anyway, the DRAM calc guy chimed in Der Bauer's thread with this. The preparation of this update was started 2 months ago, and unfortunately, it has nothing to do with you and your material. So, let's try to make sense of this. Clocks appear to be higher than advertised, very slightly, around about 50 MHz in the earlier pre-launch BIOS versions. But AMD marked it as you would expect them to. You'd expect them to mark it down, say, the 3900X as 4.6 GHz. And then if it did reach 4.65, you feel like you're getting something free out of it. Even if 4650 was achievable on a good system, you play it safe, you go with 4.6 for the average system. However, maybe at some point along the line, very close to launch, they've done something or discovered an issue, possibly with chip longevity due to high temperatures or voltages, and they've decided to actually play it safe by limiting the maximum boost temperature lower than originally planned. Since that point though, they've been working on what they claim is a firmware issue that reduces boost frequency in some situations. and there's an incoming BIOS fix for it, which also includes additional boost performance optimizations. So what out of this bunch do you actually believe? Let's say that you do believe AMD. There's still no excuse for waiting this long before responding to this. I don't know why they always wait until somebody releases an article or video that gains major traction and turns it into a mini scandal before they respond to these issues. I have been hearing about this boost thing on my Discord constantly since Ryzen 3000 launched, which was weeks ago. It was clearly not going away. At least one thing's for sure though. They must have learned another marketing lesson this time, right? Right? Over at WCCF, where another scandal brews, AMD advertises Ryzen Pro as capable of hitting 5GHz clock speeds. I had been notified of this on Twitter, but I left it alone as I was playing Warcraft. However, I had a feeling I'd be coming back to it later. Looking at the image posted at WCCF, it seems that we've got a rather clear claim of 5GHz clock speeds, with the needle pointing very close to the end point. But when I first watched the video, something in particular stood out to me. I couldn't help but feel that, well, yes, AMD had printed out 5GHz, which is dumb enough. The needle wasn't quite reaching the end of the arc, as far as I could tell. Now, unfortunately, the original video no longer exists, as due to the rather obvious shitstorm which ensued, AMD were once again forced into a climb down, removing the video from YouTube and uploading a new video with the 5 removed. So the chips now do gigahertz clock speeds. Whatever. Anyway, that's not actually the story here. The story here is that, in my opinion at least, they should have left it alone. Because I was actually right. When I watched the video originally, and in this new sanitized version, the needle is not at any point that close to the end of the speedometer. We can see in the WCCF screenshot that the image was taken at 1 minute 34 seconds. And here's one that I just took of the second video, minus the 5GHz, at the same point 1 minute 34 seconds. And you can see it's the same, the needle pointing right at the very end of the speedometer. So WCCF's screenshot is legit. But wait, didn't I just say the needle wasn't at any point that close to the end of the arc? Yes, I did. How then can I reconcile that with what we see in the screenshots? The answer to that is coming right up. Video editing is a large part of my job, so I have an unfair advantage here, but this is what actually happens in the video. I've just downloaded the video and I've fired it up into Sony Vegas. What I'll do now is I will display the output on my left screen. Now obviously I can scrub through the video either direction, however I can also go through each frame at a time in either direction. So let's go to that 1 minute 34 seconds mark that we saw in the screenshots. So we're now at 1 minute 34.07, 0.08, 0.09, and if we just keep going, 134.10, 134.11. I believe that this is the part where the screenshots were taken and where the video also shows on YouTube. However, this is not the end of the speedometer arc, and we can just continue on, flipping all the way to 1 minute 34.16, 17, 18. And it's at 1 minute 34.19 where the arc is finally completely drawn. At this point, the needle gets nowhere near the end of it, as you can see. And that is how you get a scandal out of nothing. What AMD have done here is, in my opinion, just about okay. For starters, they're targeting business users, so it's not really consumers that are being targeted by this rather dodgy 5GHz thing. But yes, noting 5GHz was pretty dumb, but they didn't actually show the dial hitting 5GHz, so this is legitimate. Does that mean that Usman at WCCF did this deliberately? I don't think so. Like I said, on YouTube, where he has clearly taken the clip from, we can see that because of the bar at the bottom. Skipping through frames on YouTube I don't think can be done. Could be wrong about that. But not only that, he also noted in his article that what probably happened here is that AMD's marketing department used stock animations for the clock speeds and forgot to tweak them according to the specs of the Ryzen Pro. What's actually happened is, it all looks fair. Presumably, the Ryzen Pro chips are going to hit about 4.7GHz. which looks about right on the graph, so long as you follow it to the very end. For me, AMD's mistake here was removing the 5 GHz. I would have left it in. Regardless of that, the drama continued a day later, with Intel's GM of desktop slamming Ryzen 5 GHz claim. So this is Intel's John Bonini. To be honest with you, I'm not really seeing any slamming of AMD's claim here. This is simply an image from Intel teasing AMD with their claim that the 9900K does 5 GHz on regular nitrogen. Nitrogen, of course, being the main constituent of air at 78%, while Ryzen 3000 can only do 5 GHz under liquid nitrogen. This tweet here caused what I believe to be an unnecessary amount of drama for some reason. Honestly, I thought this was funny, I thought it was clever, and completely fair game. AMD would have done the same thing, and in fact, they've been mocking Intel mercilessly for months over Epic and Xeon, so Intel are well entitled to rub it back in. Of course, they are up to other stuff that's a little bit less fair game, but I'm pretty sure I'll have more than enough opportunities to cover that stuff in future. Right, now finish this one up. Just a quick note to say that I had a heart scan last Thursday, and I got the results back this Wednesday. So far so good, as I apparently have no significant narrowing of my arteries. However, given my family history and symptoms, they've decided to drag me in for more tests, which will be an angiogram within the next 6 weeks. And the last thing is to announce the winners of the Robo Instructors competition, which I ran in my last video. The 3 winners of the cool little programming/game are Abigail P, Anthony W, and Donald D. And yes, this is Donald Duck. And all the winners have been emailed with their game codes. Right, I'm done with this one. As usual, be sure to check out the website. There's been some pretty good stuff recently. Very nice 5700 XT versus 2060 Super head-to-head by Donny. And I would hope to have a sponsorship in place for the website very soon. I've been working on a presentation for it and it's been a massive chore, it really has been. But it's nearly done now. And after we've got the sponsor in place, I will be concentrating fully on the YouTube channel again. But for now, it's the weekend and I am going to go gank some Horde in Stranglethorn Vale. Catch you later, guys.